Okay, welcome back. This will be part two of our section on literature reviews. And with this, I'm going to talk about sources, getting started with searching and finding and evaluating sources, and then we'll also get into some tips for writing. Um, I mentioned this in class, but this is just another way to review it. Then I can also show you some other information about it. So let's talk about sources, and this is some information from the Salkin book, and there's a resource in the literature reviews folder that I'll pull up, and you can also look at as well. So in sources, we classify them into a couple of different types. One could be general, which would just be general sources that you could find anywhere, newspapers and magazines and all that. Some sources will also call these tertiary sources, in the sense that it may also include encyclopedias or almanacs, some kind of index, or any kind of compendium of information, or a compendium of statistics. Like the National Education Association has almanacs. It has a lot of data and some factoids and those kind of things. Those will be the kind of things that will be classified as general. What we're mostly interested in having you get are primary sources and then also secondary sources. So the main focus of a literature review of this type should be primary sources. And this has to do with research papers, articles, and to some extent abstracts that will be written by the people who actually did the work. So the primary source is kind of getting it straight from the people who actually collected the data and wrote it up, analyzed it, and published their work. So you're getting it directly from them. So that's a primary source. There's also secondary sources, which is this idea of things being once removed from the people who actually did the work. So any kind of review paper or anthologies, anybody else's synthesis, in some sense, your literature review will be a secondary work, because you're going to be looking at the primary work of other people and doing your own analysis of it. But that's what secondary works are, is somebody going in and looking at a bunch of primary sources and conducting an analysis of them. There's something I can show you here. So this is an article. This is a resource in the literature reviews folder that you can look at from the Ithaca College Library, and there's other ones like this that you could find online, but there's just some more definitions of primary sources and secondary sources. There's also a distinction here between research and review articles. This is just sort of a helpful thing. Review articles might be a literature review that you would see from other authors going in and analyzing a bunch of literature, and they can be useful to you in some sense, in that you're going to be trying to find maybe a lot of sources at once, and you can get a lay of the land, so to speak, in literature, and it's a way to get a lot of sources. But then and they can be helpful a little bit. But then there's also primary research articles, which is what I'm asking you to get. So here's some examples here of let's just I'll make this a little bigger for you, but there's some examples here of primary and secondary sources. So like the Gettysburg Address, the original text would be a primary source. Someone's book about the Gettysburg Address, or its history, or what it said, or would be a secondary source. Here's some poem would be a primary source, and then if it's included in somebody else's book and analyzing poetry or that particular work, then it would be a secondary source. So here's some other examples, but those are the kind of things that we're trying to have you look at, just get some distinctions there. So we want you to get primary sources because, again, they're the most reliable in terms of what is said. There's always the possibility that somebody could have made a mistake if they quote something, or they maybe misinterpret a statistic or misinterpret a finding from an article. So if you get it straight from the original authors, you're doing the best work you can as far as making sure you have accurate information. So some secondary sources will be okay, like you may need some books or some analysis of theory or that kind of thing, but most of your sources that you get should be primary sources. We've talked about searching, so I'm assuming that everybody can get through the databases and find things. ProQuest, EBSCOhost are the ones that are most used often. ERIC as a first search is also a very good way to get a lot of information. WorldCat is for books and a lot of things, but it can give you other links to sources as well. So I'm assuming everybody can get those from the library. If not, you can always call the library help desk, and they can tell you how to get started on that. So let's talk about getting started doing your searching and your analyzing, sifting through articles. And don't forget that I've also asked you to look at the Frankel chapter, which is in the literature reviews folder. It's a pretty recent book, and this chapter just helps you, gives you some ideas on how to get started with searching and sifting through information. So on that topic, be selective in the sources that you get. As I've said, if it's not helpful to you to include a source, doesn't give you any information about your variables, your issues, or the methods you're going to use, or some test, or instruments, or something. It should be helpful to you in some way that you can draw upon. And you want to, of course, you're trying to get studies that have been done really well. And that's part of the process of analyzing them, is just seeing how good they are. And then you try to look for peer-reviewed research articles in national professional journals. I think there's some listed in the Salkin book, and I'm sure you can get lists others where. So when you're going through articles, maybe the first step would be just identify some some keywords from some readings that you have, and then you can use these in a search. You can start compiling these from things you're already reading, and then in your search you can maybe keep a list of some keywords or things that come up a lot, and then keep in mind that you're going to probably, I've asked you to get 5 to 7 sources. You're probably going to be getting a lot more than that, or at least you'll find them, and you can read through abstracts and kind of give a quick skim to see if it's something that looks promising, and if not, then you can go on to the next one. But that would be what you should do at first. So then after you find a bunch of things, maybe as you're finding them, you can, as I said, skim through abstracts or the conclusion section or something to see what's out there. Introductions are a good place to look at articles as well. And then start sifting out the ones that aren't really useful to you in some way, that aren't relevant to your topic, or that don't have anything useful for you to draw from. Sometimes it's good to look at the reference list within the article itself, because they may cite something that sounds really interesting to you, and then you want to go and go find that one instead of maybe the article that you are looking at right now. You maybe want to go get something that they cite. Or just having the reference list itself can give you a lot of other things you could pull up on a topic. And then you can maybe start looking to see if if something that is a particular work cited a lot. Like, do you see different authors mentioning the same thing over and over again? Then that would be could tell you that these are really important works. As far as going through the articles, it's a good idea to make some notes on them. In some kind of, if you want to work on a Word file, or make some notes on paper about each one, or however you choose to work. But I would just suggest you make some notes and some kind of summary and some important information for each article. So you can talk about, maybe say what was the research problem that they were looking at, what was the purpose of the study, or what was the hypothesis they were trying to figure out. How did they collect data? What were the sample? Who were they studying? What did they find? Is there anything here useful with this article in terms of what they found as it relates to my question? And then this is also a good place to look for what kinds of factors and things did they identify as explaining the results that they got. So you can go through and keep track of any kinds of explanatory factors that they point out, because that can give you some ideas of things you can ask about in your survey or in your interviews, or when you design your study. You can make sure that you focus on those kinds of factors and make them part of your study. And then you can also point out if there's really anything wrong with the article, or something really bad that you think needs to be brought to our attention, to say why, something that the people didn't do that they should have done, or some error that they made. You can do that. And then once you have done what we just talked about in step 3 for a lot of your individual articles that you think you're going to keep, now you can start looking across the articles and bringing them together. So you can start looking at integration. You can be looking at identifying themes and concepts. So let's talk about some ways to do that. You can start saying, well, how are these sources connected? What are they talking about? What are the major things that they bring up? How could these be grouped together? So let's say you have 6 sources, or 5 or so, or maybe up to 7. How can you group these together? Would there be they all mean the same thing, or are there 2 categories you'd put them in? How are they different, or how are they similar? In which areas do they agree or disagree? And then maybe take a step back and say, what's the overall story that these sources are telling? If I just had to summarize for somebody just coming into this, just walked into my office and They say, hey, what's the story of this literature that you're finding? What is it saying overall? What would you tell people in a couple sentences? And this could be a place for you to start, just to say, well, here's what I'm finding. Here's kind of where things are in alignment. Here are some things where people disagree, and here's what people are finding, and here's what the questions are. So that's what we're doing here, is trying to do this, this overview of that. Um, so but again, it's not just a summary of the individual articles. You're going to give us your own viewpoint on this. You're going to give us your own perspective and take some ownership of this, and give us the overall story here, rather than just individual summaries of works. So let's talk about some ways to visualize this idea of integrating and finding themes and connections in your literature. So I mentioned the Creswell book that I pointed out to you. Again, he's good at the how-to and making things happen on the ground. So he offers some literature maps, which is not something you have to do, but it's just a good way to maybe make a chart or some kind of drawing to show how you might connect things together. So it's on his book on page 40. This is another way of thinking about it. This is from another website. So this is something that you could look at doing, maybe just if you're going to start drawing some circles and boxes and drawing lines between them, you could do something like this. You could look at, well, what are the key sources? What are the most important things that you found there? Maybe like what are the landmark or the really foundational studies? And then you can maybe have a group where you say, maybe you just have a couple bullet points to yourself and say, well, what are the major issues and debates about the topic? Maybe have a couple things there. If you have a policy issue, you could maybe summarize and say, are there political standpoints where people differ on a policy thing? If it's not really a political kind of thing, then don't worry about it so much. You can maybe make some notes to yourself about what are the origins and definitions that are useful to understand about this topic, and where did it come from, and how do we get to where we are now? That could be something that's useful to you. You can say, well, what are the key theories and concepts and ideas that I should be communicating to people? What are the major ideas, and what are the major ways in which this issue can be understood, or the ideas that people are putting out, or the theories that are being compared, or what are the main concepts that are being discussed? Don't worry about this. We're not going to talk about epistemology and ontology, so don't worry about that. This circle here, you could say, okay, well, maybe how are people, after I've read all these things, how is the knowledge on this topic being organized? What are people talking about? Is it in terms of students? Is it in terms of buildings? Is it in terms of teachers? Is it in terms of curriculum and pedagogy? What are the main things that people are getting at here? And then you could do something like, well, then what are the main questions and the problems that have been addressed to date, and then this certainly could also include what's not been done. Here's an example of a literature map. This is another Creswell thing. He has a discussion about, here's an example of saying, okay, well, say that my topic is uniforms and dress codes in school. I want to see what's the effectiveness of school uniforms. And so I say, well, at the top level, my topic has to do with school uniforms and dress codes. And then maybe I can sift things into a couple categories. There's uniforms and how they affect behavior. And then maybe I can say, well, there's also some literature on uniforms and how they impact achievement. And then maybe under the first area here in the second level, I can say in relation to uniforms and behavior, there's some literature on how it affects students' self-esteem. And then there's some literature on how it impacts or hopefully decreases violence in schools. Then back under my other second level category regarding achievement, maybe I find something about that there's some important research looking at gender and maybe gender differences or differences in achievement based on who's being studied or how they're implemented for boys and girls. So this is just a different way to look at it. You don't have to do this either. I'm just trying to give you some examples of ways that you could start organizing your material.